This week from the global lane, crisis in Iran. As protesters pour into the streets, is this the beginning of the end to the Islamic Republic and the Ayatollahs? Immigration in Sweden. Some bad people are allowed to stay, while some good people are sent packing. We'll talk to one man who fights to save the lives of Christian converts. Ringing in the new year with more outrageous reporting from the mainstream media. CNN showed people how to use a bong for getting high. Dan Gainor of the Media Research Center joins us and sets it straight. Our man, Meng-Fei Lee, takes it to the streets to find out what people think about Donald Trump's Iranian protest tweets. And I'll drive it home on Iran and America's fleeting opportunity to do the right thing. And it's all right here, right now, from the global lane. It's the most serious crisis for Iran in nearly a decade. Thousands of people have poured into the streets, not just in Tehran, but throughout the country, protesting the Islamic State, political corruption, and the poor economy. 3 days after Christmas, demonstrations began in Mosul. They quickly spread to other cities. Some turned violent. At least 20 people have been killed, hundreds arrested or injured. Now, President Trump tweeted his support for peaceful protests, saying, quote, "The people of Iran are finally acting against the brutal and corrupt Iranian regime. All of the money that President Obama so foolishly gave them went into terrorism and into their pockets. The people have little food, big inflation, and no human rights. The U.S. is watching," end quote. UN Ambassador Nikki Haley said the demonstrations are completely spontaneous and the result of a long oppressed people rising up against their dictators. She said the international community must not remain silent.
If the Iranian dictatorship's history is any guide, we can expect more outrageous abuses in the days to come. The UN must speak out. In the days ahead, we will be calling for an emergency session, both here in New York and at the Human Rights Council in Geneva. We must not be silent. The people of Iran are crying out for freedom. All freedom-loving people must stand with their cause.
Joining us with more on the Iran crisis is CBN News Middle East Bureau Chief Chris Mitchell. Chris, it seems the crowds are smaller than those during the Green Revolution back in 2009. So is this the beginning of the end of the rule of the Ayatollahs in the Islamic Republic, or is it something else?
Well, hey, Gary, it's great to be with you. It may be too early to say that it's the end of the mullahs' rule in Iran. But, you know, based on the Arab Spring that happened in 2010, 2011, you really don't know where these will go and will they actually end up toppling the regime. Right now, it remains doubtful. But one thing I'd like to say, it's what a contrast between what President Trump is doing now in support of these Iranian protesters and demonstrators, as opposed to President Obama in 2009, when he remained silent, when millions of people during that Green Revolution took to the streets to protest the election between Mojave and Ahmadinejad, which was basically stolen by the mullahs. So good for Trump to stand up for freedom and be a voice for these people that are in the streets of Tehran and other cities.
Well, it's interesting you mentioned that because some former Obama officials, Philip Gordon, who used to be at State, and Susan Rice, the former national security advisor, suggested that President Trump could best help the protesters by staying quiet. Now, Chris, you've worked in the Middle East for a long time, so how well does silence work there?
I don't think silence works well at all, Gary, and you know that too by your working here in the Middle East for many years. And I think when you expose this kind of corruption, these kind of conditions, and bring it to the light, and as President Trump said in one of his tweets, the whole world is watching, I think it really does lend strength and power and moral fortitude to these people that are out in the streets, literally risking their lives to come against this corruption, these economic conditions, and the fact that many are frustrated that Iran is using billions of dollars to support proxy wars in Yemen, in Syria, in Iraq, and Hezbollah in Lebanon as well.
Chris, it seems that economic issues are at the heart of these protests. Is there anything else?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things, Gary. I think one thing is that people are literally fed up sometimes with the religious oppression inside Iran. I remember a couple of years ago, I was sitting in Erbil, sitting down with 5 Iranian believers in Jesus who had come over for a Bible study and discipleship. And they were just talking how oppressive it was inside Iran, how it was sometimes they had to wear, the women in particular had to wear the head coverings. how oppressive that was, how it was hard to express their faith. And I think one thing that a lot of media is not talking about, Gary, except CBN News perhaps and some other few other networks, is the fact that there has been a spiritual revolution in many ways in Iran. There's a revival of many people who are coming to faith in Jesus because of dreams and visions. And I'm not sure this is why people are taking to the streets, but I think this is part perhaps of what's happening while people are opposing the Iranian regime.
Well, I know, Chris, you'll keep a close eye on that for us. But on another subject, President Trump also posted a tweet about the Palestinian Authority. Now, he said the United States pays them hundreds of millions of dollars a year and gets no appreciation or respect in return. They don't want to negotiate peace with Israel, said the president, so why continue the payments? Chris, I imagine the Palestinians didn't respond too well to that.
Not very well at all, Gary. They said that Jerusalem is not for sale, not for gold or silver. They felt like President Trump is blackmailing them. They also said that they were working towards peace until President Trump recognized Jerusalem as the capital of Israel. But Israelis think quite the opposite. The deputy defense minister said that basically the Palestinian Authority has been stealing from the world for years. And one foreign official said as well that it really is exposing the hypocrisy of the Palestinian Authority. So certainly the PA, the Palestinian Authority, is not taking kindly to President Trump. But Gary, this is really the first time in many years when really a U.S. president has really called the Palestinian Authority to task about the things that they do with the money, the millions and billions of dollars over years that the West has given to the Palestinian Authority.
Chris, I've been covering politics for a long time, going back to Jimmy Carter, and before that even Gerald Ford. I don't remember any U.S. president ever saying that. And we'll see if the president follows through on this as far as reducing the amount of money we send. Now, before I let you go, I know you had an amazing visit to Mosul, Iraq recently. Let's take a look at your story, and then we'll have a quick question for you.
CBN News, escorted by Iraqi National Police, drove where the fight against ISIS was at its worst. This part of Mosul remains a military zone, littered with unexploded ordnance, IEDs, and dead bodies.
We're standing in the center of Mosul, and you can really see it's an apocalyptic landscape. Everywhere you look, you can see devastation and destruction. It's a bit eerie, too. It's very quiet. It's like a ghost town. Reminds me of what a European city would have looked like in World War II after it was bombed out. And if you look around, you can tell it's not going to take months or years, maybe decades, to restore Mosul to what it once was.
We stood within just a few yards of where ISIS leader Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi declared his caliphate in the summer of 2014. Now that three-year dream lay in ruins. His fighters, dead or gone.
What we're looking at here, this devastation that we can see around us, is the price that it took to destroy that most vile of projects that was declared in this city in June 2014, calling itself the Islamic State. This is the cost, this is the price, this destruction is what it took to turn that thing from a reality back into just an idea again.
The Tigris River divides Mosul. Coalition forces bomb many of the bridges linking east and west. East Mosul still shows signs of life, but West Mosul bore the brunt of the conflict. One report says more than 9,000 civilians died in the battle to liberate Mosul from the Islamic State and left the city in ruins in the attempt to save it. We looked through this nearby church, a stark symbol of what ISIS sought to destroy. In Mosul alone, ISIS destroyed dozens of Christian churches and buildings. At one time, more than 10,000 Christian families called Mosul home. Now, just a handful remain.
I'm standing at what used to be the center of St. Catherine's Church, and behind here was a convent for Dominican nuns. ISIS used this as their headquarters, and then it was destroyed by a U.S. airstrike.
After ISIS took over Mosul, they used this place as their headquarters. They brought everything they stole from the people, their cars and their property, here. They used it as a factory for weapons and bombs.
I can't express of my feelings, of my sad feelings about that, because I am comparing how it was before and now how is it? And not the buildings, but the act of the Dominican sisters.
Johanna says the Dominican sisters served as salt and light to Mosul.
You know, this convent for all Christians in Mosul has a big importance because the people of Mosul knows the Dominican sisters. They established many schools in Mosul, and all the people now who are in good position in Iraq, they are graduated from these schools, especially in Mosul. For that, the Dominican sister had good reputation in Mosul.
His humanitarian organization provided food and relief to Sunni Muslims here when the city opened up.
We were here when they bombed the minaret of Hadba. In the same day, we are distributing here foods for families. And they asked us, we threatened you, we killed Christians, and now you are helping us. We didn't understand that. Dr. John from CSI was with us. He told them that is Christianity. They love their enemies, and you are not their enemies. You are victims of ISIS as Christians. For that, we are here to help you.
While much of Mosul lies in ruins, Johanna hopes for a better future.
I hope that Mosul one day become as it was before. That is my dream.
Chris, on a personal note, what were your thoughts as you toured all that destruction?
I had never seen anything like that, Gary. And as I said in the story, it was sort of like watching a World War II film when you saw many European cities that were carpet bombed and just destroyed. So block after we were in parts of Mosul were just completely destroyed. I know there's an estimate now, maybe $100 billion to rebuild Mosul. There was one person that said, you know, Mosul had to be destroyed to save it. It's kind of an ironic statement. But when you go through those streets and see what the destruction that is wrought, you don't know if these places are going to be livable for years, even decades. It's going to take a lot of things. And it really, Gary, I think what really struck me as well was what ISIS has done there in northern Iraq and Syria and many parts here in the Middle East. Lives have been changed for generations, it seems, the destruction they've wrought. And Lord willing, people will be able to rebuild one day, but it'll take a long, hard road and a lot of money and a lot of effort by the world to help them rebuild their lives.
Chris, I know you've been in the Middle East now for nearly 2 decades. Have you seen anything like it?
Nothing like that. It was just amazing. You've seen destruction, you've seen suicide bombings, you've seen limited wars like up on the northern border with Hezbollah and the southern border with Hamas. But this destruction was nothing I had ever seen. And I don't think the Middle East has seen anything like this in a long, long time. And hopefully, and unfortunately, Gary, as we're looking at 2018, we're looking at the possibility of maybe even a greater war between Iran and Israel. And so people should be praying for the peace of Jerusalem, praying for the leaders here in this region that kind of war won't unfold right now on our doorstep.
Yes, Chris, they've suffered so much in Iraq and Syria and elsewhere in the Middle East. So thank you for joining us, and thank you for your insights.
Great to be with you, Gary.
President Trump says one problem with current U.S. immigration policy is that some bad people are allowed into the country, some good people are kept out. Well, CBN News has reported regularly about immigration difficulties in Europe, particularly in Sweden. Late last month, another young woman was raped by an immigrant gang in the city of Malmö. It was the 4th incident in just 2 months. Is Sweden allowing criminal elements to stay while deporting some good people? Well, joining us to set it straight from Stockholm is immigration attorney Gabriel Donner. Gabriel, tell us about the urgent case of an Afghan refugee who became a Christian and he's now about to be deported.
This is regarding a client of ours. We will call him John because he regretfully is afraid of being subjected to one form or another of reprisals if he would give his real name. He has been an active Christian for 3 years in a congregation here south of Stockholm, and knows all the members of the society, of the particular congregation, and has also brought his own brother to bear what's called to faith. However, he was arrested on the 28th of September 2017 and put in custody. He was put in solitary confinement because he had spoken of the Bible to a Muslim who was in the same situation as himself. He was also deprived of his Bible and kept in solitary confinement for a week. After a week, he was released, but hugged one of the other Muslims who was offended by having been touched by a non-believer and was put back into solitary confinement for another week before he was transferred to a regular prison where he has been kept basically ever since. And now, of course, 3 months have passed and he's still there. Meanwhile, he was to appear in court. Regretfully, he appeared completely deranged. He was cowed. He was afraid of the guards who brought him in. He was brought into the courtroom in prison clothes, in chains, with 3 rather bulky policemen who were sitting around him. And all he said was, I have found the sole truth, and he tore a serviette into 2 pieces and formed a white cross with it. And he said, this is the truth, this is the truth, this is the truth. The court then declared that since he was deranged, he cannot be a Christian, and decided against, and he's supposed to be deported.
Swedish authorities say he is not a true Christian. How do they determine that?
First, they said that he wasn't emotional enough to be a true believer. And secondly, when he was emotional, they said he didn't have enough facts to talk about. So he has faced a moving target when it comes to the treatment of his particular case. The criteria for checking whether a person is truly Christian or not is, of course, a major problem because of the difference of approach to religion by people who are believing themselves and atheists. Among atheists, there tends to be a belief that Christian conversion requires, for example, general expressions of fear. Nobody would become a Christian without first considering all the risks and all the rest of it, is what the authorities here seem to believe, although Christian history tells us the opposite. People convert in spite of danger and do not consider the danger all that much.
If you watched any of CNN's New Year's Eve coverage, you might have seen something you wouldn't expect. A reporter on what's known as a cannabis with pothead partiers. We have Dan Gainor with the Media Research Center to talk about this story and its aftermath still making news. Dan, thanks for your time. First of all, tell us what happened in that live report.
Well, what happened was CNN embarrasses itself every year at New Year's Eve, and it tried to outdo itself this year by having reporter Randy Kay get on this so-called cannabis, and it's a bus filled with pot-smoking partiers in Colorado, and to the point where she's even wearing earrings, pot earrings, and encouraging people to smoke pot. She showed a gas mask. This is one of the crazy things that pot smokers do. She showed a gas mask with a bong attached and then handed it to somebody to go try it out, encouraging them to smoke.
Dan, have we seen anything like this before, even though marijuana is legal in Colorado? Was it the right thing to do?
No, we haven't seen anything like this before, thank goodness. But CNN has humiliated itself on New Year's Eve before. Last year, Don Lemon appeared to get drunk and get a piercing. Previous years, they had Kathy Griffin do embarrassing things that I won't even discuss on air because they were so awful. So it seems like basically there's no holds barred for CNN every New Year's Eve.
Well, what has the fallout been? Has there been any fallout following that live shot that clearly embarrassed Anderson Cooper?
Well, I mean, a lot of things happen on New Year's Eve that embarrass Anderson Cooper, and he still does the New Year's Eve broadcast every year. When Kathy Griffin embarrassed herself and humiliated herself in front of him a couple of years ago in a way that, again, can't discuss, he still does the New Year's Eve broadcast the next year. So I think it's kind of an act. And the fallout is they get mocked a lot. But I think in CNN's mind, that means they get talked about a lot.
Well, and maybe some ratings, too, that they haven't been getting. So what does this say about the news judgment of the mainstream media?
They have none. I think we've moved into, bread and circuses. Very much like the whole Roman notion of we're just going to do something to entertain the masses as long as the masses watch.
So it's really about entertainment rather than journalism. Does this indicate a greater problem, Dan, when it comes to professionalism, what and how news is reported by the mainstream media?
Well, absolutely. We've seen the whole Trump era of journalism has gone, if you'll pardon the pun, gone to pot. And, so CNN spent a whole year acting like its staff were on drugs. Finally, the end of the year, it showed that they were willing to encourage others to do the same.
Well, I think it's going to be another wild year. So what advice do you have for viewers when it comes to news sources?
Well, it's going to be, for all that 2017 was absolutely awful, 2018 will be far worse because it's an election year. And that means viewers need to take everything, not just with a grain of salt, but with a mountain of salt. Because as we see with Trump's tweet yesterday about North Korea, the media want to treat it like Trump is the one making things worse. But you can go back into 2016 when Obama was president and North Korea was threatening to nuke the United States. Journalists aren't journalists so much as activists now.
Well, Dan Gainor with the Media Research Center, thank you so much for your insights.
Thank you.
Some former Obama administration officials have criticized President Trump for his favorable tweets about the protests in Iran. Is the president right to voice support for those peacefully demonstrating for more freedom in the Islamic Republic? What do average Americans think about it? We asked our man Meng-Pei Lee to take it to the streets to find out.
It seems like our president, Donald Trump, it's siding with the protesters or encouraging the protesters to protest towards the government. Now, share with me, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I don't see where we're doing anything wrong with Trump talking about supporting the protesters, and I think the protesters have got a good, valid point. I think the Ayatollah Khomeini's the dictator he is.
It's good that the citizens are standing up for what they believe, and hopefully nobody will get killed over it, but they should have the right to do it.
I don't like it. Need to get rid of him out of office, seriously, before the United States get in trouble. Seriously.
You mean get rid of our president?
Yeah, for real. He's dangerous, man.
How dangerous is he?
Very dangerous. He's the worst. He's the worst I've seen.
My actual thoughts, I'm retired military and I stay away from politics in general, so I refuse to answer that question.
Well, he jumps the gun a lot. But I think with everybody else in government, they keep him under control.
I think Donald Trump doesn't know what he's doing. We already have enough problems for them to messing up with other countries. Let them decide their things, Stay here, United States, focus on our issues. Not North Korea, not Iran, or nothing like that.
So you think our president... Well, I can't tell you. But anyway, so you think our president should step aside from all those international crises?
I mean, I'm not saying that he should step aside, but he needs to know that he's not in charge of other countries. People have their presidents, their laws, their culture. So you gotta respect other people, their space. Of course, you can say your opinion when you ask, but not like demand anything.
Well, having my Christian beliefs, I feel that God's in control. And whatever people do and say, just feel like let him take the wheel on all of that.
How soon we forget these scenes. Remember the Iranian Revolution of 1979 and 52 American hostages held by Islamic militants for 444 days? President Jimmy Carter's missteps may have contributed to his re-election loss. The hostages were released the day Ronald Reagan was sworn in as 40th president of the United States. That's because the Ayatollah Khomeini didn't want to risk the wrath of a new, stronger American president. Now, fast forward 35 years later, Barack Obama and John Kerry reached a deal with Iran. The Islamic Republic promised to limit its nuclear program in return for the lifting of economic sanctions and the return of billions of dollars frozen in overseas bank accounts. The Obama administration said it wasn't a treaty, just an agreement. But it sure seemed like a treaty and should have been voted on as such by the U.S. Senate. But Obama knew he couldn't muster the two-thirds required by law to gain approval. Opponents of the nuclear deal said the billions of dollars that Iran would receive would be used to support terrorism around the world. And Iran couldn't be trusted to keep its promises. The Obama administration argued the Iranians could be trusted. The agreement would only benefit America and the Iranian people. Really? I don't think Iranians are marching in the streets today because they've reaped the benefits of the nuclear deal. They're protesting a poor economy. Unemployment is close to 13%. Inflation is more than 9%. They're also demonstrating against political corruption. Where are those billions the country has received since that nuclear deal was signed? Likely in government leader bank accounts, also used for Iran's proxy wars in Syria and Yemen. And many Iranians have simply just grown tired of the Ayatollahs and that Islamic theocracy. More and more Iranian women are joining protests against the wearing of the hijab. President Trump took to Twitter in support of those peaceful protests, but he received immediate criticism from some former Obama administration officials who preferred he just shut up when it comes to Iran and the protests. After all, we wouldn't want to anger the Ayatollah, would we? But Obama administration's silence and a lack of support contributed to the failure of Iran's Green Revolution in 2009. Remember that one? More than 100 people were killed, maybe as many as 10,000 people arrested. These protests are smaller in scale, but they do demonstrate the growing upset and displeasure of the Iranian people. The government's response reveals the failure of the Iran nuclear deal and the true nature of the Iranian regime. Will the demonstrations bring about an end to the Islamic Republic? No, but the United States has a fleeting opportunity to increase the pressure on the Iranian leadership. Later this month, President Trump must decide if the United States will reimpose sanctions against Iran. He's already decertified Iranian compliance with the deal. He's likely to reimpose sanctions. The political unrest in Iran and the government's response, 20 people killed, hundreds of others likely arrested, gives Trump the justification he needs to drive another dagger into the heart of an agreement that he calls the worst deal ever negotiated by the United States. Nuclear deal or no nuclear deal, the USA must continue to take a stand for freedom and support those who risk arrest and even their lives for liberty. Jesus told us in his Sermon on the Mount, Matthew 5:14 through 16, that we are the light of the world. A city set on a hill cannot be hid, nor do men light a lamp and put it under a bushel, but on a stand, and it gives light to all in the house. Let your light so shine before men that they may see your good works and give glory to your Father who is in heaven. So, let's keep working for liberty, speaking out, doing the right thing, and shining our light of freedom for all the world to see. Well, that's it from the Global Lean this week. Until next time, be blessed.